Tucker Carlson, George Soros, George Gascón, and the fall of Los Angeles. Los Angeles County's NUDA identifies with the criminals, rather than their victims. Many of the most important elections are the ones you hear nothing about. The news media barely covers them and most voters don't know they're happening. As a result, a small group of committed extremists get to control the outcomes of those elections, often with disastrous results. Bill de Blasio, for example, was elected to his current term as New York City mayor with the support of 8.5% of the city's population. De Blasio then used that non-mandate from a non-representative election to completely destroy the biggest city in our country. That's not democracy as we were taught it, but it is increasingly how things work here. George Soros understands that. He became extraordinarily rich by finding ways to exploit the weaknesses in systems that he did not build himself. In the early 1990s, Soros became a billionaire by shorting the British pound, crushing the Bank of England in the process. He went on to repeat those tactics in countries around the world. Then he turned his attention to the United States, and decided he would fundamentally change our society. Soros began funding politicians and political initiatives that had very little popular support. But because so few were paying attention to what he was doing, he often got his way. On those rare occasions when Soros was criticized for subverting our democracy, he and his allies in the media claimed bigotry. According to them, Soros was yet another oppressed billionaire victim of discrimination. That tactic worked, because it always works, so he kept doing it. If you're wondering why so many people are being robbed, raped and killed in American cities right now, George Soros is part of the reason. Soros has funded the campaigns of left-wing extremists in district attorney races in cities like Philadelphia, St. Louis, Chicago, and Boston. Traditionally, a prosecutor's job is to enforce the law, but Soros wanted rigid ideologues who would instead let murderers and rapists go free while allowing our society to degrade and collapse. In Los Angeles, Soros won his biggest victory so far. In the most recent election, Soros backed George Gascón for district attorney, spending more than $2 million on his campaign. What happened next was the entire point of the exercise. Gascón stopped enforcing the law in Los Angeles Tuesday. He is now moving to dismiss all sentencing enhancements against an alleged double murderer accused of killing a Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy. If the change proposed by Gascón goes through, the accused killer would be eligible for parole. The details of the story are important, and here they are. On June 10, 2019, off-duty Deputy Joseph Solano was standing in line at a Jack in the Box restaurant in suburban Alhambra, California, when authorities say the suspect, Red Nelson, shot him execution style. An hour earlier, police say, Nelson opened fire on a group of skateboarders in downtown Los Angeles, killing 31-year-old Dmitry Koltsov. Solano was taken off life support 2 days later. What's happening in this case is not unusual and it won't be going forward. George Gascón has promised to stop seeking enhancements in every case that comes before his office. In a functioning society, prosecutors are allowed, if they wish, to seek longer prison terms for criminals who, for example, inflict great bodily harm on their victims or carry out gang assassinations in public. George Gascón is getting rid of those additional penalties, along with cash bail and the death penalty. Why is he doing this? Because George Gascón, like the billionaires who made his current job possible, is far enough removed from the consequences of crime that he can identify with the criminals rather than with their many victims. Gascón believes that poverty causes crime, an idea for which there is no evidence in actual social science. However, it's the kind of thing that half-wits learn in college, repeat, and turn into policy when they get power. The irony is, we know exactly what policies like those Gascón is imposing on Los Angeles will do and who they will hurt. They will affect people who live in the neighborhoods with the most crime, and those are the poorest neighborhoods. We know that will happen because it's happened before, and George Gascón did it. George Gascón was the district attorney in San Francisco for 8 years, from 2011 to 2019. Over his tenure, the city recorded the third highest rate of violent crime in all of California. The rate of property crimes increased by 37%. In 2017, the city of San Francisco, which is not a big place, reported 31,000 car burglaries. That's what George Soros is funding. After all, what good is calling the police when they won't even take a report when they arrive? During George Gascón's tenure in San Francisco, arrests flatlined. On his orders, prosecutors filed criminal charges in only about half of all felony cases. In misdemeanor cases, it dropped to 40%. With nothing to do, prosecutors left Gascon's office in huge numbers. In his final term, a total of 61 San Francisco prosecutors out of 140 left their posts. Almost half of those resigned. These numbers have been public for years, but you don't need the statistics. It's obvious to anyone who lives in San Francisco that the city is being destroyed. And George Gascon is one of the main reasons for that. It's so obvious that San Francisco Mayor London Breed, no conservative, declined to endorse George Gascon in his race this year. San Francisco's city attorney also declined. In other words, some of the worst, least able, most mediocre politicians in the United States looked at George Gascon and said, "He's too much for us. He's a threat to the people he represents." George Soros looked at him and said, "That's the man I want to fund. That's the country I want America to become." The people of Los Angeles are fully aware of this, but they know there's nothing they can do to stop it. A grieving mother of a murder victim can't raise money for the Democratic Party or Black Lives Matter, so no one cares what she thinks. This article is adapted from Tucker Carlson's opening monologue on the December 15, 2020 edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight.